Welcome to the Hermetic Astrology Podcast. I'm Gary Caton in Waynesville, North Carolina. You can find me on the web at dreamastrologer.com. And today is Wednesday, February 27th, and it's just after dawn here in North Carolina. So that makes it Mercury's day and Mercury's hour. And in fact, Mercury is currently at what we call maximum elongation from the sun. And so I'm going to show you in a chart wheel what that looks like before we look at what it looks like in the sky. So let me share my screen here. So this is the chart for the current moment. You can see here that the sun is rising in Pisces. And overhead we have Jupiter and the moon in Sagittarius, and then behind the sun, not yet risen, is Mercury at about 26 degrees of Pisces. And you see there it says S1. This is a marker for a star. It's called Marcab, Alpha Pegasus, the brightest star in the constellation Pegasus. Mercury recently made maximum elongation yesterday at about 18.1 degrees from the sun. That's the furthest that Mercury's going to get from the sun during this cycle before he starts to slow down. And basically what maximum elongation is that Mercury's speed is exactly the same as the sun's, right? Before he was faster, so he was kind of moving away, and then when his speed slows down to be equal that of the sun, then it becomes less and the sun begins to catch him. And eventually that means that he goes retrograde and disappears. So this is a turning point in the visual cycle of Mercury, one that I have found to be very important. And so, I tabulated, you won't find these maximum elongations in any ephemeris. They're hard to find in an ephemeris because what you have to do is you have to interpolate longitude positions day by day. So I went and created these tables in my book. There's about 125 years of these in my book. And so you can see yesterday on the 26th, Mercury made maximum elongation at about Pisces 27 degrees, which is just a few degrees from this star, Marcab, Alpha Pegasus. And I think it's really important to understand when these alignments are happening near these stars, because visually in the sky, what that looks like, I'll show you. I went out the other night on Sunday evening and took a photo. Right now, by the way, if you haven't seen Mercury in the sky, right now is an incredible opportunity because of the way that the ecliptic rises, or rather sets this time of year in the evening. It's pretty vertical. And so even though Mercury's only 18 degrees from the sun, it's 18 degrees pretty much straight up. And that means that Mercury is very high and bright right now. And so this is a wonderful opportunity if you haven't seen him before. I was out the other night and, it's sunset and then waiting around a little while, and I started looking around. I noticed that Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, had come out. When you see Sirius and Procyon and Orion rising in the east at sunset, by the way, that's a pretty good indicator that spring's on the way. So I saw Sirius and then I saw Procyon, and those are pretty bright stars. And I thought, okay, Mercury should be along here any minute. And I was looking, and I didn't see him. And then I realized, oh, wow, he's even higher than I thought he would be. And so there was a good, at least 30 minutes that I got to spend observing, which was awesome. So this is a little bit earlier in the evening. I'll just blow this up to full screen here. So you can see here's Mercury. Unfortunately, there's some light pollution down here from one of the small mountain towns nearby. But you can see over here, this is Marcab. This is what's called the Great Square of Pegasus, right? So this is Alpha Pegasus. Now you can see now that's pretty darn close right there. I mean, as the crow flies, that's that's what a conjunction in longitude looks like. The ecliptic is going this way, right? It's just at a little bit of an angle. And so if you draw a perpendicular line to that, Mercury was pretty close to a conjunction there with Markab. This is Beta Pegasus. This star is called Sheet, Scheat. This star currently is the star closest to the vernal point of 0 Aries. And so you hear people talk about how, we're in the age of Pisces versus the age of Aquarius, but really, in terms of actual stars, this star is the one defining the vernal point right now. We're in the age of the flying horse. And I mean, isn't it interesting that it was only about 100 years ago that human beings took flight, and now we travel the globe en masse, So I just thought that's really interesting. And this is very easy to spot. These are bright stars that you can see pretty easily. So here's the square of Pegasus. And then a little bit later, as Mercury was getting closer to the horizon, you'll see down here, Mercury's closer now. These stars are just a little bit dimmer. But you can also begin to see, and I actually have to put on my glasses at this point. These stars here, there's 3 of them. This is the fish that swims along the ecliptic of Pisces. So these are the stars of Pisces, which are very dim compared to, you can see here Markab, and there's Alpheratz, which is a very bright star that, according to modern astrologers, belongs to the constellation Andromeda, even though it's part of the Great Square of Pegasus. That's a very bright star. You can see how much brighter it is than these 3 little stars of Pisces here. Now, if I put that on a sky chart so you can see the entire deal. See, these are those 3 stars that we were seeing there of the fish that swims along the ecliptic. There's a fish that swims vertically. This fish swims towards spirit, and there's a fish that swims horizontally, more along the material plane. So there's a dichotomy there with Pisces, right? And this part of Pisces was rising alongside the vernal point back when Christianity was the force ruling the world. And now that capitalism is ruling the world, this is the fish that's closer to the vernal point. So that's very interesting in and of itself. But you can see here Mercury, and here's the star Markab. And you can see there the Great Square of Pegasus. So Markab really is the closest thing visually in the sky that you would notice if you were out. And so that's why that I put, in this column over here, the stars that were located in these degrees, because a lot of times we can get just as much information from the stars and the constellations as we can from the signs. I mean, we can talk about Pisces. We can talk about the fact that Mercury is going to spend literally half of the entire year will be spent in just 3 signs, the 3 water signs. Mercury will spend half of the entire year of 2019 in the 3 water signs. And that's very remarkable. And that's, pretty much what I wrote my book about, Hermetic Astrology, the Mercury elemental year. If you haven't seen it yet, it's from Rubito Press. That's why it's called the Mercury elemental year, because this extended stay of Mercury in the water signs is, I think, very important. But also, I wanted to include these stars specifically because, as I said, you have a very clear visual reference there, as I've shown you. And then what you have in these 3 columns are basically 3 separate alignments that are very different. Mercury forms a, and I should probably pause here for a second so that I can show you a better diagram to show you what I'm talking about here. So let me pause just for a second. This is the this is an interesting photo that I found of Hermes. Here you can see the caduceus, so we know that it's Hermes, and you can see the wings on his feet. And so this is an interesting little sculpture that goes along with the actual visual alignments that we're seeing here. So there's a clear, like, mythopoetic parallel that goes on along with this alignment that we're seeing. Okay, so let me show you here why I pay so much attention to these elongations. This is a diagram from my book that my publisher Aaron Cheek put together. I had made several diagrams, several versions of this before, and he kind of cleaned it up and made it simple for the book. But you can see here we are at number 1 there. Basically, this is the maximum elongation. So Mercury was came into visibility as the evening star, right? Here's the horizon. And it got as high and bright as it's going to get, and here we are. And from here, Mercury begins to descend. Okay, so there's a quality of beginning to descend towards the horizon from here on out. So that tells us something about the experience. But what's really fascinating to me, what I noticed is that this event of maximum elongation in the west as evening star, right? So after dusk in the evening, and this event of the conjunction with the sun, which happens invisible. And later, Mercury rises in the east in the morning, just before sunrise, and makes a maximum elongation here. These 3 events all happen near the same degrees every single time. So what you have is above, below, and above. That which is above corresponds to that which is below, and that which is below corresponds to that which is above. And I was just awestruck when I discovered this, because that's pretty much exactly what it says in the Emerald Tablet of Hermes. It says that which is above corresponds to that which is below, and that which is below corresponds to that which is above, to accomplish the miracles of the one, or to accomplish the miracles of unity, if you will. So what we have here is a differentiated unity. And these 3 events this time around will happen on February 26th. March 14th is the inferior conjunction with the sun, and then April 11th. So these 3 will all happen in these degrees near Markab. Now, of course, the one that I just showed you was very visual, and the one in April will be also very visual, but in the morning sky. And this event is invisible. It happens below the threshold of visibility, because the sun's so bright, you know, anything within about 15 degrees of the sun, you simply can't see it. And so there's a parallel story that we can use to map our experience of this journey between the elongation through the retrograde and then morning elongation again. And it's very simple. Negredo, albedo, rubedo. Okay. This is a pattern that shows up in alchemy, where you have blackening, whitening, and then reddening. And it's 3 stages of transformation, where something begins to be purified, and then there's a new energy that comes out of that purification, and then there's a reddening, there's a revivification of that thing in the end. So it's literally dies and is born again, essentially, is what this is. So this is something that I find incredibly useful. In terms of, like, Joseph Campbell's heroine's journey, he would call this first phase separation, initiation, and return, right? In the Gnostic Christian tradition, they call it purgation, illumination, union, right? So you have to be purged pretty much in every tradition, the first step of any kind of spiritual process is purification, right? So the priest comes through the church waving the incense and whatnot, or you do a sweat lodge if you're a Native American. Various other traditions have various ways to do this, but purification, purgation, that's the first step. Alchemists call it nigredo because there's a blackening when you put something in the alchemical alembic, right, in this container, and you seal it off. Begins to sort of, decay and ferment, and then later there's a new the spirit of that thing is kind of released from its material container, and then there's a reddening, there's a ferment that happens from this, where new energy is released. New creative energy is released. So you see, this is why I have a problem with, this so-called shadow of the retrograde theory, because we can see clearly here there's three different phases, if you will, or three different segments of this journey. There's three different colors that are associated with it. Shadow is colorless, number one, and number two, it's pretty much the same shade, right? There's not a lot of variation of color. It denotes a one-dimensional experience to me. Whereas if we have nigredo, albedo, rubedo, that's a very different experience. That suggests that this blackening, this darkening is only the first step in a larger process. And I think that's really vitally important. If we're going to harness these planetary cycles for positive growth, then we need a map that shows us that. We need a map that that explicitly contains that. If our map is one-dimensional and the whole thing is covered by this negative term of shadow, we're probably likely to say, yeah, you know what, I think I'll pass on all that nonsense. I'll just go in my cave and hide for 40 days. And I mean, you literally hear people talking that kind of thing. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do the other. And it's like, man, that's never been my trip at all, to advocate anyone hiding from life. Now, at the same time, if Mercury is at this high and bright appearance in the western sky, right, and then over time, over the next couple weeks, it's going to get a little bit lower and a little bit dimmer until it disappears altogether. Clearly, that's kind of a descent. That's a kind of something is passing away. This is a 116-day cycle on average. So there's a 4-month cycle that is coming to an end, and endings do have a special quality about them. So this first stage from 1 to 2 here being associated with the nigredo, yeah, for sure. I think the classical associations that people get, Mercury retrograde, oh my God, it must be something negative is going to happen to me. Yeah, I think in this stage, some of that does apply, because you know why? If we're going to keep growing, think about it with like an organic metaphor, for instance. At the end of the season, what does a farmer or a gardener do, right? You've harvested all these lovely tomatoes and corn and whatnot, and then you got when Scorpio comes, right? Scorpio is the sign of mass death in the northern hemisphere. The vegetation dies back. And what do? You take the old husk and the stalks and everything, and you gather it together and you put it on the compost heap so that it can break down and form, nutrient-rich soil that you can then put back on the new crop the next time around to keep the cycle going, right? Well, that's the healthy way to deal with the organic cycle. And so, psychologically, experientially, we would want to do basically the same thing. So yeah, there is something that may want to call your attention to, there's a force, what we kind of want to call it the spirit of Hermes, whether we want to call it the inner healer. There's a growth-oriented force. In psychology, they call it the actualizing principle, right? The actualizing tendency. There's a growth principle inherent in life that wants to keep growing, but it understands that that process is cyclical. And so it's going to be calling to your attention right now, and really for the next couple weeks, things that might be, hey, you know what? You got about all you're going to get out of that. And maybe it's time to put some of that on the compost heap and free up energy for a new crop, something new, right? But before the new can be seeded, I mean, think about it. If we leave all that stuff in the field, right, and it's all like, you know, tangled and everything, when we go to try to plant our seeds next time, we're going to have to like clear all that stuff away just to get a row to put our seeds in. And then the seeds, you know, if we don't, then the seed's going to have to fight to get through all that extra stuff. So it's like making extra work for something that's just tender and, you know, not quite able to really, you know, fend for itself yet. So if we kind of tend our garden now and begin to put things away and begin to understand that there are things that maybe we can decrease our connection to naturally, like that's a good thing. That's not something to go, oh, yuck, you know, run for the hills, you know, hide for 40 days or anything. And of course, I'm dramatizing it a bit, but, you know, that idea of that this is something to avoid, I think is really tragic, because if we rather embrace it, then we can get all of the lovely albedo and rubedo colors. We can get the actual full array of the experience, you see. So you might say, okay, yeah, I'm with you in theory. I mean, all that sounds good, but what does that even look like? What are you talking about practically? And so in my book, in chapter 4, The Alchemy of Transformation, I included several experiential exercises to go along with this material, because I wanted people to have some practical things that they could do to align with this nigredo, this falling away, right? So that they could embrace the cycle and reap the albedo and the rubedo later. And so the first thing that we're talking about, by the way, in alchemy, in Hermeticism, we tend to divide things up into 3 parts, right? 3 is a really magical number in Hermeticism. Hermes, thrice great, right? And that means that he was the master of the 3 Hermetic arts: astrology, alchemy, and magic. So the first principle is like, it's symbolized by a circle with a line in the middle. That's called salt. And salt is basically the material aspect of something, the sort of cellular matrix of it. And then we have sulfur, which is like a triangle with a cross below it. That's like the animating life force of the soul, the fiery life force of something. And then Mercury, in terms of alchemical principles, is the consciousness of something. It's it's sort of the spirit of it. So what I did is I separated the exercises into 3 parts, and we're going to talk about ways that you can purify, right? Because that's what nigredo is about. It's about clearing the field, purifying. So purifying the salt, what does that look like? Well, if salt is the material body of something, then clearing away the physical detritus, you know, all the junk, all the stuff. I mean, it's really popular. There's a thing out there right now where I guess there's a lady who has written a book about this, about like clearing stuff out of your life that's not like, that you're not in love with, like everything that you're not in love with, chuck it. And I guess I've heard that the thrift stores are like full to the brim and they're not taking any more stuff. So you might have to get a little bit creative. about. But yeah, basically in Native American tradition, this is called the potlatch or the giveaway, right? So this, you know, in the Christian tradition, this is tithing, right? A tithe is, you know, traditionally thought of as like a 10% donation. 10% of your income is donated to someone who is in more need of it than you are. But a tithing is also like a group of people who share collective responsibility for one another. So there's this idea of that it's both an act, it's a verb and a noun. Yeah. So you can give away now with water, right? Mercury is spending more time. Mercury is going to be retrograde in Pisces. Mercury is spending more time in the water signs. You know, what does that represent? That represents emotional attachments. So things that we have, maybe old clothing, or, you know, I'm terrible about that. I have a pair of jeans that I really love and they're all ripped up and holy. I wear them until they literally fall apart, man, because it's comfortable. I love these things. You know, same way with shoes. And my wife gets on my case. She's like, why don't you get a new? It's like, I just love them, you know. And so this might be a time where I could say consciously, yeah, maybe it is time to listen to my wife and get a new pair of whatever. So that would be like a way that I could sort of, you know, tithe to myself, if you will. And another way to think about, you know, with the emotional attachments and kind of doing the giveaway, I mean, think about, oh, geez, I mean, think about things that that you have sort of negative emotional attachments to, something that you're angry about, or something that you're holding a grudge, or, you know, and I mean, all you ever hear is, oh, you should let that go. And like, if only it were that simple, all right? Where, yeah, sure, I'd love to let it go. But yeah, I had an experience like that, about that, where it kind of became a lot more clear to me, where I had sort of like, you know, this list of things that you know, that I felt was wrong, that somebody had done. And I realized that, you know what, you're setting yourself up as a judge and jury. Like, is that really your role? You know, maybe you should give this list to God and let that person and God figure out like what their responsibility is with these things. And then, you know, when you stop trying to be God and hold this person accountable, you're going to have a lot more energy to live your life, and you're not going to be constantly thinking about these things that happened, you know, a long time ago. And that's when it really became like, you know, apparent to me that, you know, you give these things away for you. I mean, you give them away because it's the right thing to do. Of course, it's you know, forgiveness is a Christian thing to do, and a spiritual thing to do, and all that. It's the right thing to do, but also it's good for you. You know, it frees energy up that you can actually live your life with, instead of living in the past attached to these negative emotions and stuff. So in the section where I talk about purging the Mercury, purging your consciousness, you know, I talk about journaling, meditation, contemplation. Pretty much it's been proven scientifically that emotional expression is really good for you. Think about it in terms of like Catholics going to confessional, right? This unburdening of your soul, it's in every spiritual tradition. And you know, you can do it through journaling. It's been the benefits of journaling are so incredible. It's been shown scientifically time and time and time again. And then with the purging of the sulfur, this is about fasting, basically. Fasting is a purification ritual, and I want to make it clear right now that I'm not prescribing someone stop eating altogether in any way, shape, or form, because like if you're going to do that, you need to be careful. You know, there are health risks with that. But at the same time, we could fast from sweets, for instance. That's probably not a bad idea. Or in my case, beer. That's one of my weaknesses. I love to drink my beer, and I could probably take a break from that now and then. And it wouldn't hurt me at all. It probably would help me a little bit. But there are things that we can fast from. For instance, negative, judgments, negative words, that saying, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. That's a type of fasting, you see. Fasting from politics, for goodness sakes. I mean, I certainly, or social media, taking a break from something that has become sort of toxic or sort of like non-productive, and just saying, hey, you know what? This doesn't feel so great to me right now. I'm going to take a break from it. And I think for me personally, I think it's important not to feel like we need to be militant about that. In other words, like, I can't do, any of this at all for like 40 days straight. I'm going to have zero experience of this thing. Well, I mean, as a counselor, behavioral psychology pretty much says, like, you can't go from, either a whole bunch to zero, or from zero to a whole bunch like that. Like, that's pretty much not how it works. You have to shape behavior over time. So you start wherever you're at, and then, okay, if the frequency is like, I don't know, 3 times a day, you would go down to 2 times a day. And that's still fasting, right? And then maybe by the end, you're down to 1 time a day. If it's something that you do maybe 1 time a day, maybe you can try to do it every other day. So, be gentle and kind. I mean, this is Pisces after all. Be gentle and kind with yourself about this. You don't have to be like really harsh and militant about it. But yeah, these are some things that we can begin to practice. And basically by doing these exercises, the Nigredo, and embracing the Nigredo, we're freeing up psychic and life force energy. We're freeing up energy for something else. And so we're creating like a magical reservoir of energy, and like nature abhors a vacuum, right? So that's where the albedo comes from. Through embracing the Nigredo and the process of decay and putting our old stuff on the compost heap, right? What happens in that compost heap? The heat starts, it starts building, and it starts breaking stuff down, and then this new energy gets released. That's where the albedo comes from. Okay, so now that we have an idea of what's going on, and an idea of what it feels like to embrace that process, where specifically do we look for this to show up? Because, people have complicated lives. There's 12 different houses in the astrological chart. So one thing, of course, you could focus on the house that is Pisces in your chart. For me personally, as Aquarius rising, Pisces is the 2nd house, right? And so for this entire year, what I call the trigon of mastery, right? 2nd house, 6th house, and 10th house are going to be activated. So for me, it might be about work. I might need to like think about, okay, what are some things regarding work that I need to let go that are not really productive, where I can actually spend my energy better doing these other things where I'm getting more reward for my energy spent. And that's actually very true for me right now. I've been really busy, and there's some things that I need to let go. And so I need to look at, okay, what can I afford to let go of, and free up some energy and time to do these new things that are coming in. So that's one way you can do it. Another way that you can do it, as I said, besides looking at the element of water and the houses, you can look at these constellations. So back in, what was it, 2017? Let's see, yeah, April, May of 2017, I had an article here in the Mountain Astrologer, an astronomical view of Venus retrograde, right? And I have this quote from Manilius in there. Here would another have ended his journey in the skies, having dealt with the signs against which the deities of the planets move. But me the heavens entice to hasten on a tour of all the stars in the sky. So as I said, we can get as much or more from these stars. And we're going to talk about Pegasus quite a bit. But let's talk about Pisces for a second, because in this article, I do go into that myth quite a bit. And by the way, if you can't find this back issue of TMA, I have a PDF of this article in my archives. And so all these old articles that I've published, old webinars that I've done, old talks that I've given, I mean, I've given talks all across the country and a few different continents even at this point in time. So that there's like literally dozens and dozens of talks and articles and reports and whatnot in my archives. And that's one of the benefits of being a subscriber. But I talk about this loop that Venus made, you know, near this western fish of Pisces. And I talked about, you know, the dichotomy of Pisces with respect to this northern fish that swims. So you can see it a little more clearly here, right? So here's the fish that swims upward towards spirit, right? And here's the fish that swims like on the material plane along the ecliptic. And as you can see, Venus was making a retrograde near that fish, similar to where Mercury is now. And I'll pull up a loop of Mercury here in just a minute. But Robert Hand actually talked about this quite a bit in one of his books. Actually, I think it's like a collection. But he talked about the myth of Pisces. And I'll dig that up here in just a second. But, you know, he talked about like when these stars of the northern fish were precessing, you know, you had the big Christian explosion, and there was this, you know, the material plane was gross. And I mean, even with the Neoplatonic people, you hear this kind of Aristotle and all these cats, you know, oh, you know, materiality is gross and spirit's where it's at and everything. And then as the Renaissance came along and we began to study and understand the laws of the physical universe better, that kind of became inverted, where like, you know, scientism became the law of the land, and literally like, yeah, like according to scientism, the universe is just dead matter. There's no soul, there's no spirit. It's just matter and random reactions happening in your brain and stuff. And it's like, to me, that's a pretty radical, like, dichotomy. Like, it's either all spirit is the only, you know, good thing, or it's all material and it's dead and there's no spirit. I mean, isn't there a middle ground? Can't we have a body and enjoy being in it and still be spiritual? You know what I'm saying? So, I think that one thing to look for would be like, you know, and whether you're Christian or not, we all live in a world that is dominated by this kind of thinking, by this kind of materialistic, capitalistic, you know, profit at all costs, and like, you know, you're not a success unless you're turning a profit, and all these kind of things that like seep into our brain and kind of condition and program us to you know, be on this materialism kick that that science has kind of inaugurated. So I think that basically what I'm advocating for is like, where's the balance between spirit and matter, right? And where's that balance for me personally? Like, what's my ideal balance? Maybe, you know, I don't know. Maybe I do prefer, and you know, most people who are into astrology probably have a very strong spiritual tendency, right? So maybe their mixture is a little more spirit than matter. But you know, maybe somebody else, you know, who's like a business person, they're like, yeah, no, I need to keep my eye on the ball on the matter side of things. So it's a little bit on the other, you know, the scales shift a little bit. But either way, like, whatever my ideal mixture is, where am I actually at, right? Where, like, has my mixture got, you know, in when you're, you know, studying carburation in cars, for instance, the fuel mixture, right? Like, is my mixture too rich? Have I got too much fuel in there and it's bogging the thing down? Or is it so lean that I'm not getting all the power that I need? And figuring out, like, adjusting your carburetor between the spirit and the matter mixture, that I think would be a really good thing to begin to think about with the Negretto and the Pisces archetype. So yeah, that book that I was referencing earlier with this essay on the Pisces archetype, Robert Hand's Essays on Astrology, it's an earlier work of his. Really cool way of looking at the Pisces archetype that I thought, I mean, I got a lot of mileage out of that just in an article for TMA, and I think you could probably like get even more mileage out of it. Okay, now before we move on to Pegasus, let's talk a little bit more about this idea of this loop that Mercury makes, right? Because what I've discovered is that there are very different shapes that the planets make depending on what section of the sky they're in. There's basically 8 different shapes. And so in this particular part of the sky, Mercury makes a northern loop, okay? And so if we look at the big picture, this is what it looks like. So you can see here when Mercury first got into Pisces, so here's this vertical line here represents 330 degrees of zodiacal longitude, which is 0 Pisces, okay? So as Mercury enters Pisces, he's kind of chugging along. This here is the sun, and this is the ecliptic plane, okay? So this is also a really good way to begin to understand what retrograde motion actually is and what direct motion actually is. So as Mercury entered Pisces back earlier in the month in February, he's kind of chugging along, kind of relatively parallel to the ecliptic, right? So that's what normal motion is. The vast majority of celestial motion for planets is direct and on or relatively parallel to the ecliptic. So Mercury's chugging along, normal, you know, day to day, you know, yada yada, same old, same old. And then all of a sudden he starts to kind of gradually ascend. He starts to get closer to the ecliptic. Then he crosses the ecliptic, comes up here in like this sort of, you know, when you're going up the roller coaster, and then kind of comes around. You know, and you can feel it, right? So it's kind of this slow, gradual ascent. So this is where we are now, right? You saw those stars, those 3 stars that I showed you earlier when I showed you a photograph. There's Mercury, you know, under those stars, and then so Mercury comes under those stars, then it comes up and goes even closer to those stars, and then it kind of starts to descend and lose latitude rapidly towards the direct station. And now notice that the direct station happens here, and then the bottom kind of falls out, and it's mid-April until Mercury's back to like same old, going along direct motion, relatively parallel to the ecliptic. Okay, so there's this so he starts out below the ecliptic, comes up above, and then comes back down. And I think this is really important to understand that, you know, in some loops it's the other way. Mercury's going along above the ecliptic, and then the bottom drops out at the beginning, and then at the end it's back up. So there's southern loops and there's northern loops. Now, generally speaking, this is also one of the reasons why Mercury is so visible this time around, because this is a northern loop. And when planets are in northern latitude, they tend to be more visible. So there's a quality of northern latitude that was considered a kind of dignity to classical astrologers. Is basically they saw planets in northern latitude as stronger because they're more visible. I mean, I'm guessing. I don't know that anybody explicitly said that in any of those old texts, like, because I don't know that they were actually doing much observing, but I'm guessing that that's why they thought it was stronger, because it does tend to be more visible. So think about this for a second. There's something that was previously kind of like hidden or not as visible. Maybe we were in touch with it more on an emotional level, right? Like I was talking about before, you know, there was this list of things, these grievances that I had with somebody. And it was like, you know, this emotional turmoil inside of me. And then, you know, when I kind of held that list up and looked at it, I realized, like, does this even belong to you? Are you even the right, just keeper of this list? You know, who are you to judge, you know, to set yourself up as judge and jury of another human being? You know, like, maybe you should let that list go. So, and that's just one example, but there might be something that previously you had an emotional connection to, and now it becomes, you can see it better, you can see it more clearly, and you go, wow, you know, that feeling that I was feeling, wow, I really see it now. And like, now I know the actual physical characteristics that go along with that feeling. It could be like that, or it could be like, oh wow, that feeling that I had, this thing that I see now is actually some kind of different. Like, there's something different about the seeing of it than the feeling of it. And so you get that conversation between the below in terms of the feeling we have about something, and the above, the actual witnessing of it. And you get that conversation, that correspondence between above and below, and you begin to notice, again, you know, what kind of adjustments need to be made there. Now, if we zoom in a little closer here, we can see, as I said, this is, it looks like, actually I need to zoom in even a little closer. Yeah, it's not until March 1st that, so here we are, just a few days before this. We're literally right here. Maybe I can move this down a little bit for people to see. There we go. Kind of center it. So here we are right here. Mercury still has some time to go before the station, right? And then look at this. After stationing retrograde, it actually keeps going up a little bit in the first part. So right around the station retrograde, we may be like, yeah, this Mercury retrograde is not so bad. Like, what's all the fuss about, you know? All the way up until about March 11th, right? There's actually still rising in latitude. So something is still getting more visible. It's like, wow, I can actually see more. This retrograde is showing me more than, and then it begins to descend. And then by the equinox, March 21st. And by the way, in the current issue of the Mountain Astrologer, I have a couple paragraphs where I outline this experience of this loop. So, but it's at the end of the loop this time, after March 21st, where the bottom begins to drop out, and there's like this, and it's like, whoa, what's going on? So, you know, the actual conjunction happens somewhere in there. So on the one map I was talking about, yeah, the Negretto kind of happens first, then you get the albedo and the rubedo. Well, it's not exactly linear, right? Because there's this map too, and in this map we might get back into the Negretto a little bit, and we might go, oh my goodness, like this thing that I thought I had chucked whatever I didn't need of it, like there's a lot more that needs to go, right? Still need to lighten up a little bit on that, so that, yeah, you know, we might revisit that, or we might actually feel the momentum of the albedo if we've really, like, done the full embrace of the negrito, we might feel like the albedo really begins. So there might be this tremendous release of new creative energy. But right, Mercury is going downward, so we might be getting deeper into the feeling of, oh my God, this feels incredible. There's new emotions available to me that I hadn't, experienced before. There's new depth of feeling that's available to me that I hadn't experienced before, and so forth, right? So we can begin to get a more experiential map, a more three-dimensional experiential map of this. Yeah, I think this is a really interesting way to look at it. So, by the way, I post these on the Facebook page for the, I post a lot of stuff to the Facebook page for the podcast. So that's, facebook.com/hermetic.astrology, right? So be sure to check us out and like us there, follow us. By the way, we also now have a secret group, Facebook group for members only. So that's another benefit where I'm sharing even more stuff. So like those couple photos that I shared with you earlier, I shared several more with the group there. We're going to have a members only webinar later today. So there's a lot of fringe benefits from being a member. But even if you're not ready to do that yet, you can get these diagrams for free there on the Facebook page. And you can begin to check out, mapping your experience vis-a-vis this experiential map that I just showed you, and maybe you can get some mileage out of that too. So yeah, briefly I'll show you, one of the main benefits of becoming a member is that I put out these multimedia reports each month that go along with the podcast. So I'll just show you briefly. This is a diagram that I made that shows you the different loops, right? So Mercury's north node is here in Scorpio. So in Scorpio, Mercury makes this kind of S-shaped loop where it crosses the ecliptic going northward, right? And then in Aquarius, it makes this big looping, kind of like the traditional roller coaster. And then over here, it's more skewed, right? It's a little more skewed. And then it makes the southern loop there in Taurus. So this is something that I discovered about the shapes of these loops, so that they're, the experiential dynamic of these different retrogrades varies according to where that retrograde is happening vis-a-vis the nodes of Mercury, right? So this is one of the things that I go through in the report that I'm talking about. And of course, there's a lot more information there for you to check out if you want to become a member. I mean, the bronze level membership is only $10 a month. So for $10 a month, you get a report that goes along with the podcast every month. And then for $15 a month, you can get discounts on consults. So it's $1 a minute if you want to meet with me anytime. 5 minutes, $5. 60 minutes, $60. Then the gold membership, you get access to those archives. That's $20 a month that I was talking about, where I have dozens and dozens of these reports. So that's what that's all about. Okay, so let's bring this thing home here and kind of end up where we started and take a look at this idea of the constellation of Pegasus, and in particular the star of Markab, as being a rich source of interpretive material that we can figure out, hey, what's this Negretto want of me anyway, right? So one of the resources that I really love when talking about stars and constellations is this site, Constellations of Words. So they have star lists by constellation. They also have, if you go over here and you click on the tab for star lists, you can get the stars listed in longitude order as well, right? So you can figure out, hey, Mercury's, in the late 20s of Pisces. So what the heck is going on there with the stars and stuff? And you can see here, for instance, there's Markab at around 24 of Pisces, right? So you can get a link there where it talks about that particular star. Right, you can see there's Markab, and it's the top, it's the back of the neck, right? It's the place where you hang on to the horse. It's like the anchor point of where, I think one of my, it's the Arab's word for saddle or ship or boat, right? Anything that you ride, this is the thing that you hold on to. So there's a stability factor. I think Bernadette Brady also talks about this in her book, where there's a stability factor that goes along with Markab. So there's a Saturn kind of, this anchoring, this solidity, this continuity. There's a kind of a Saturn process going on here. And it's also the alpha star, right? So it's the brightest, it's the, the main star of the constellation, right? So, and then there's a lot of information here that you can read about regarding the constellation. There's another site that I really like too that's called Theoi, Theoi, OI, that you can get a lot of information about these things too. But yeah, if you just notice here on the constellation map, right, here's the neck and head of Pegasus, and this is the square, and there's Markab right there where the neck meets the body, right? So that's that anchor point that we talked about. And here you can see, I mean, that's literally like where Hermes is riding the horse. So there's a rich panoply of mythic associations that go along with Pegasus. Where Pegasus came from was, there's a whole slew of constellations in this part of the sky that are all related. So nearby is Perseus, who's holding the head of Medusa. And that's where Pegasus came from. When Perseus severed the head of Medusa, sprang out of her neck, right? So there's this positive energy. It's very albedo-like, right? It's a white horse, and it flies. It's like really classic albedo medicine, if you will. So there's this springing, which is also kind of Aries-like, right? The glyph of Aries is supposed to represent like the springing forth of life in the spring, in the season of spring. And in fact, early on in the myth, after Pegasus springs out of Medusa, Athena tames the winged horse and gives it to the muses. And in its excitement of seeing the muses and wanting to relate to them, it's like pawing the ground. And as it strikes the ground, there's a spring that gushes forth. And this spring is like the muses are, of course, the sources of inspiration for the various arts. They represent like the inspirational. So there's that below that we were talking about, that comes up into the above, like this loop that we were talking about. So there's this springing forth of this inspiration that's associated with Pegasus too. And of course, with Markab being the steady point of that, it's like, I mean, one of the things with the muses is either you're in touch with them or you aren't, right? And it's like being in love. It's like, man, being separated from that thing that you love is really difficult and really hard for an artist. To be lacking inspiration is like the worst thing that they can experience. So how do I make that connection with the muses more stable, more secure, where I can steady that flow of inspiration? And I talk about this in my book too. There's what's called an hour of power, where your natural biorhythm is there's certain times of the day where, for instance, I do a lot of my writing first thing in the morning, because I find that my head is clear, my energy is there. But so So I've accomplished quite a bit that way of like every morning, first thing in the morning, you know, I do my writing. But how else can I structure my activities to make the sources of inspiration that I'm doing, you know, more? So I've been consulting with people who are helping me get like, for instance, getting a content calendar together for the podcast, so that I know what I'm talking about, you know, further down the line, and I can kind of schedule, and I can find people who might be good guests to talk about that with, and line them up so that I've got everything lined up. And I can get more rich, more steady sources of inspiration to share with y'all. So there might be themes like that of the steadying the flow of inspiration into your life that come along with Marcav. One of the other things that's really cool that where the Constellation of Words site actually collects, you know, references from across the web, and there's a reference to another site where this person was talking about this, what they called the Pegasus Syndrome, because one of the interesting parts of the myth of Pegasus is that it was not just by Perseus, who rode Pegasus with the head of Medusa and then turned the monster that was about to devour Andromeda, right? Turned it into stone and saved the day and so forth. But Pegasus was also ridden by this hero, Bellerophon. And Bellerophon gained so much success in riding Pegasus to victory over notably the Chimera, right? Which is like this beastly conglomeration of different beasts, and then got the idea, hey, you know, I've had so much success with riding this winged horse, like I can just go on up to Olympus and just hang out with those cats, right? And it's like, uh-oh, I smell hubris in the air. It's interesting because we talked last time about with Gray Crawford and I, he was talking about this idea of Ganymede being abducted up versus Persephone being abducted down. But being abducted up in a way where you're kind of stuck in this sort of upper realm that's not really grounded in reality, and so that you're sort of almost too over-inspired where you can't really ground that in reality. This is more of an over-inspiration where you get abducted up and then knocked down. You know, Bellerophon on his way to Olympus, Zeus says, yeah, I don't think so. Like, where's your invitation? Sends a fly to sting Pegasus, and Pegasus bucks, you know, and there goes Bellerophon down to the ground, crippled and lame, and kind of you know, not, you know, anti-heroic at that point. So there's this idea of both the ability to overcome obstacles in very unusual, extraordinary ways, right, by mounting Pegasus. It's interesting, the same site talks about how poets would refer to, yeah, I'm mounting Pegasus means I'm feeling inspired, I'm getting ready to write. Flying on Pegasus would be, I'm writing every day, man, it's going great. And whereas my Pegasus won't fly, or I can't find my Pegasus, would be a way of saying, yeah, I got writer's block, you know, I'm stuck. But it's important to remember, like, when we are like, you know, when we've got that steady inspiration, to not like try to overdo it and become like a, you know, a god or something, because that can result in losing that inspiration, maybe even permanently in the case of Bellerophon. So there's a little bit of a cautionary tale there in terms of taking things too far, which, you know, a lot of these myths, you get a lot of that, of course. There's a kind of a there's a sociological dimension to them, as well as a pedagogical dimension. But yeah, I think that that's an interesting kind of mixture of energies of this, that with this Pegasus syndrome. But as an artist, I mean, I really relate to that idea of, you know, either can't find my Pegasus, or I'm mounting the Pegasus, or yeah, Pegasus is flying, you know. One of the things that I did to try to mount my Pegasus is I created a spagyric tincture with the plant mullein, and I made an election for it and everything, where Mercury was like emerging out of the beams as evening star and in Gemini, and you know, it was a great election. And what happened was I kind of got abducted up. Not only did this spagyric cure my writer's block, but next thing you know, I found that you know, Hermes had a task for me, and it wasn't just one book either. And now I'm working at work on the second one. So that was kind of like the abducted up in a good way, sort of thing. But yeah, it's important to remember limitations and kind of, you know, that Saturn principle with Markab, like, and right now Saturn is dignified in Capricorn. So, you know, getting proper structures, getting things properly in their place in the right order and all that sort of thing is actually very available right now. And that seems to be, like with Markab, like finding that right balance of, yeah, I'm flying the horse, I'm not trying to do too much, but I'm not, like, you know, constantly getting on and off the horse either. I'm kind of steadily flying this thing, this inspirational art. That seems to be, you know, the lesson here. Speaking of, I just got a message from my editor over there at horoscope.com. By the way, if you haven't seen, I've done a series of articles for them on the entire year's worth of Mercury retrogrades, and then there's an article on Mercury retrograde in Pisces with horoscopes that's out there for free, so you can check that out. And I just got an email that I noticed this morning of like, hey, we got some more work for you. So it's like I'm riding that horse, you know, and just I'm saying yes to this work when it comes along, and this new work when it comes along, and then figuring out, okay, like, what do I need to, like, you know, kind of do less of in order to make room for this yes. So yeah, have a look out for that, and have a look out for these themes of Pisces and the balancing of the material and the spiritual, and with Pegasus and Markab, and finding that steadiness of inspiration. Yeah, and it's okay to embrace the negretto. Yeah, it's okay that the things don't always go the way we thought, because if we can understand that maybe there's a purpose to that, and that maybe by embracing that, we can actually get something else that we couldn't even have imagined is available to us, then I think that that's a lot more life affirming, and it's a lot more realistic. And in my experience, it's totally worth it. So I hope this is a different way for y'all to look at the retrogrades, and a different way to think about experiencing them. And you know, I'll be back to talk about the albedo and the rubedo phases later. So that's it for this time. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to check us out at Facebook/hermetic.astrology, and of course I'm at dreamastrologer.com. And until next time, bright blessings of Hermes as evening star. See you next time.